Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of Lotus Way, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. In this episode, I'd like to talk about plants for spiritual growth. As our culture becomes more open to the idea of plant medicine for spiritual growth, I'm noticing an interesting trend. It's a trend towards a fixation on only a handful of plants that happen to be psychedelic plants, or that impair your usual perception of reality. So this is a fascination or fixation with only certain kinds of plant medicine like ayahuasca, mushrooms, cannabis, San Pedro, peyote, and some other plants that I won't even mention here because I don't want the names out there in circulation, because frankly, if you take too much, it can be absolutely fatal. And I find this fixation on just this handful of plants really interesting, knowing that we have almost 400,000 species of plants on this planet, and that each one carries a very special benefit and wisdom for us. Now, the motivation for using any plant for spiritual growth, as long as it's truly a sincere motivation, is noble. I have friends who have used plants like ayahuasca in South America, with shamans of many generations who have gone into the jungle to use these plants to unravel habitual patterns and see themselves in a new light. We can call it eating shadow, purifying beliefs that aren't of service, clearing or cleansing negativities or other patterns. And I find that in most cases, the motivation is pure. When people are purely motivated to work with plants, no matter what types of plants, when they're purely motivated by the sense of spiritual or personal growth, it's pure. And yet, as these types of so-called journeys or trips become more and more trendy, like even JP Sears has a funny spoof video about his ayahuasca journey, I can't help but feel that the fascination with this method is a reflection of our super size me culture. You know, this super size me culture, this idea that more is better. The more intense it is, the more impactful it is. The more suffering there is, the more purifying it is, or the deeper it goes, or the more beneficial it is. I also understand that in our culture, we are yearning for meaningful rituals and rites of passage. We're yearning for a sense of our own spirituality and an authentic experience of our true nature, which is vast. And I get that. And yet, in today's day and age, this method feels like a very yang way of trying to attain personal growth. If we speak in terms of yin-yang, ideally we have a balance of both. And yang meaning an overemphasis on doing versus being, stretching ourselves, pushing beyond our limits, working ourselves hard. And this is when it's an imbalance, right? We can become slightly obsessive or fixated on that sense of there being one right way, feeling like we need additional pressure in order to grow. When culturally, what I think we need more of is to embrace more of the yin within ourselves. When you look at nature, a flower just blooms. It doesn't have to have extreme situations. It can be effortless, and we all have that capacity to full bloom. The process of awakening can be gentle, nurturing, loving, nourishing, and insightful. It doesn't have to be an extreme experience. It can be gradual and over time. It reminds me of that story of the rabbit and the turtle who are having this race, and the rabbit jumps out of the blocks, races off, and in the end gets distracted and doesn't make it to the finish line first. The turtle, on the other hand, plods along, goes at a slower pace. He's very dedicated, devoted, consistent, and he actually gets to the finish line first. And I believe it's similar in terms of plans for spiritual growth. We want to jump out of the gate like the rabbit and work with something that's really going to make an impact in a dramatic way. And then there is this tendency or risk of getting distracted. And that's one of the trappings of working with hallucinogens. There's another way to work with plant medicine that's much more gentle and gradual, and that would be the use of herbal tinctures. And more specifically, working with flower essences, something that I've done for the last 18 years and have a lot of experience with it, and have seen that, for example, with only 5 drops in the mouth, taken 5 times a day, we are like the turtle, constantly, diligently, mindfully, on a day-to-day process, working at unraveling these patterns that hold us back. My flower essence teacher used to talk about how in our DNA, in our cellular makeup, we carry up to 6 generations back of information from our ancestors. Oftentimes we may have thoughts that we think are our own, and they actually are bubbling up from our cellular memory. And so by using flower essences consistently, we can have insights and aha moments on a day-to-day basis. Because I hear stories about what it feels like to take ayahuasca, that there is this microscopic perception of our behavior. We have this heightened experience of ourselves, and we can really analyze everything about ourselves. And from my own experience, what I can say with a modality like flower elixirs is that the process appears to be somewhat similar in terms of the self-awareness portion of it. Except you're using a remedy that's super diluted, a very low, subtle, and yet powerful, energetic dosage that can help us peel the layers off on a day-to-day basis. And they're totally safe. They don't impair our cognitive function. You can give them to babies and pregnant women and children, and you can take them every day for the rest of your life. So if you're into this kind of experience of these very dramatic plants that have dramatic effects, one of the things that I think is very important to ask yourself is, who is the person that is leading you through these experiences? Because in some ways, it can be really dangerous if not done with the proper dosages, guides, and people who truly understand it on a deep level. For example, it can open up channels too much or too fast, can fry your brain, impair your sense of functioning on a more long-term basis. Because what I'm seeing is that there is a tendency to take at face value that someone is a so-called shaman, or they sufficiently understand how to work with these intense plants. And from my perspective, that is putting yourself in someone's hands who you don't know, who you haven't sufficiently evaluated over a long period of time to see if they're truly qualified. For example, in the Tibetan culture, in order to follow someone in that way as a spiritual guide, you would observe them for at least 7 years to truly evaluate their methods and their level of realization. And this is in the case if your motivation is truly and sincerely to work with plants for spiritual and personal growth. Ultimately, you want to evaluate the methods that these guides use and to see where they've brought them to in their lives. What kind of people are they? Are they ultra compassionate? Do they have a tremendous positive impact in the world? Are they incredibly loving and wise? Do they walk into a room and just light up the entire room? Do you feel like something is absolutely transformed inside you in their presence? And do you want to be like them? Because if you're using their methods, you will end up like them. All of these are questions you want to ask yourself about any spiritual guide or teacher, because ultimately there is a guide that is the liaison between the plant world and you and these experiences. And also, we're subtle beings, and I think that sometimes a gentler approach gets more profound results over time because you have more consistency and mindfulness around it. The way that I see people using some of these more dramatic herbs to me almost seems like a quick fix and actually follows more of like the pharmaceutical model under the guise of plant medicine, because it's almost as if it's like, let this really strong herb fix me, or let's let this really intense experience work something out of me so that by the time it's over, I'm a different person or I've worked through something. Like really compacted experience. And the reality is there really aren't any shortcuts. There is no quick fix. And using an herb or forms of plant medicine in that way almost really just reflects more of like the pharmaceutical model. And if we're looking to attain our full potential with the clearest faculties and sharpest awareness, why would we continually impair ourselves? It's just not necessary. We have everything we need within our own minds, as long as we have the right methods. So in summary, some of the reasons that I think fixating on only a handful of herbs for spiritual growth versus some of the other almost 400,000 plant species on the planet, the reason I think it's not a wise move to focus on those dramatic, intense herbs for spiritual reasons are that it's limiting. Only working with hallucinogenic plants is limiting. To ignore the wisdom and insights of the 400,000 other species out there, it just seems limiting. Another reason is that I think that our culture really needs more yin and not yang. We need more gentleness, more tenderness, more awareness of the subtleties, more listening. Like listening to the trees, listening to the flowers, listening to Mother Earth. What are the messages that the plants have for us? And really being able to dive into that level of subtlety and knowingness and interconnectedness with nature without being impaired. I think that's really, really important that we develop that level of awareness and sensitivity. What we need isn't more stimulation, more taxation to the nervous system, and more stress. That's not what we need more of. It's more like slowing down, quieting down, listening. And with other more subtle forms of plant medicine like herbal tinctures and flower essences, you can lead yourself through your own awakening without necessarily needing a guide. And you can do this little by little, day by day, like the turtle, consistently and with dedication for profound results without the risk of distraction or fascination. Because ultimately, we have to do the spiritual work ourselves. The plants just show us the way. They show us things about ourselves. There really is no quick fix or shortcut. Sure, we may have some gut-wrenching, vomit-inducing, mind-blowing experiences, and then in the end, we have to go back to working with ourselves on a daily basis, working with our emotions, our habitual tendencies, our patterns, being with ourselves every day and being with what arises every day and continuing to learn and open into all of these experiences and emotions that we have. I have not yet met one person who has attained enlightenment through hallucinogens. These are my views, and of course, like everything in life, everything is subject to changes, and they are definitely based on the last 18 years of experience that I've had in working with flower essences and working with thousands of people who are also using flower essences. And so my perspective is coming from this place of having seen dramatic, transformative effects of people working with flowers for accelerated personal growth and accelerated spiritual growth in a way that is very subtle and gentle and tender, yet very, very, very powerful. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this topic? Feel free to comment on our Instagram page or on the blog post about this podcast at lotusway.com/3. And that's spelled lotus like the flower, WEI.com/3. Would love to know your thoughts. Thank you so much for listening to The Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at lotusway.com.